Have you ever watched the birth of a baby in a modern hospital and considered the event from the child's point of view? He's pushed out of his warm, secure pocket and thrust into a strange world. Then he's held by his heels and slapped on his backside until he yells in protest. That's a pretty rude introduction for a new fellow in the neighborhood. But it's a necessary transition because he wouldn't continue to grow and learn unless he faced the challenge of a new stage in his development. Well, that analogy is illustrative of the film you're about to see. Only this time the subject is not a child's birth, but his transition from childhood to adolescence. Here again, the passageway is often painful and insulting and threatening, but is also necessary to continued growth and development. This is part 4 of the Focus on the Family series, in which Dr. James Dobson offers some concrete suggestions to parents of adolescents. He shows how the process of growing up can be less hectic when mothers and fathers comprehend what's happening and convey that understanding to their youngster who feels like he's hanging by his heels. Let's join Dr. James Dobson in Laurie Auditorium for the first part of Preparing for Adolescence, the origins of self-doubt.
But we really need to turn our attention to the teen years because I cannot let this weekend get away from us without referring to some of the problems associated with adolescence and the teen years. Tough, tough, tough time of life. I wouldn't be 13 again for anything on earth. And I doubt if you would either. And I'd be hard-pressed to say whether it's harder on the kids or harder on the parents. You know what Mark Twain said about adolescence? He said, when a child turns 13 years of age, you should put him in a barrel, nail a lid down on the barrel, and feed him through a knothole. And when he turns 16, you should seal up the knothole. May I see the hands of any of you parents who have kids in the barrel at the moment? Anybody? It is a difficult time of life, but it's hard for the kids, too. It's not just us that goes through a struggle at that time. I heard a youngster 2 years ago practicing for the bicentennial address. And when the parents came in on the big night of the program, he was supposed to stand up and say what Patrick Henry had said. And he memorized his lines pretty well, but on the big night, the parents came in and he stood up and looked at that sea of faces and panicked and blurted out, "Give me puberty or give me death." Folks, the choices are just about that clear, I think. Dr. Yuri Bronfenbrenner is the man that I consider to be the foremost authority on child development today. He's at Cornell University. He is Jewish. He does not share my Christian beliefs, but that's what makes his beliefs interesting to me because I find almost perfect harmony between what I see with regard to the family and the concerns that he has with regard to the family. And I think a lot of other people are drawing the same conclusions. But he was asked by a Senate subcommittee what he considered to be the most important years of life. And he told them that he knew that they expected him to say the first 5 years of life. That's what everybody says. We've heard that until it's been drilled through us. First 5 years are the most important years of life. Instead, he said the junior high years. Because he said it's not at all uncommon to send happy, well-integrated, successful, well-developed kids into the 7th grade and have them emerge 2 years later broken and battered and bruised and torn apart, and some of them never recover from it. Junior high is devastating emotionally to many, many kids. And many of you went through tough times at that time and still bear the scars of it, because junior high can be the most brutal time of life. And I think it behooves us here to at least give a little bit of attention to that time. And what I'd like to do is make a couple of recommendations to you. First, let me begin for those who still have the younger children and you're able to influence the development between their and adolescence, early adolescence. May I suggest that you postpone adolescence till your kids get there. See, there is an entire movement that would come. Thank you. There's an entire movement now that would bring the teenage ethic and all that it means, all of that heterosexual competitiveness and the beauty and all of that down and sell it to your preschool kids, and especially your preschool girls. And at the forefront of this movement is the Barbie doll movement. Folks, I hate Barbie dolls. I have gotten, thank you. I've got a crusade going against Barbie dolls, probably because I have a house full of them, and a little late to be trying to get rid of them, and now they're kind of cast aside. But I didn't really realize the impact of those dolls until it was too late. But if I had it to do over again, I don't think I would allow them to come in the door if I had a choice. Primarily because Barbie sets up an image that will be impossible for any child to meet later on. See, you take a little 3-year-old girl who ought to be playing with teddy bears and Walt Disney kinds of things and the traditional memorabilia of childhood. And instead, here is Barbie, this perfect creature who does not have flaws. Barbie does not have acne on her face. Barbie does not have fat anywhere on her body. Her legs are long and thin. Her skin is airbrushed. Barbie's hair has body, whatever in the world that is. Barbie is busty. It's a phenomenon for a 13-year-old girl. Folks, there is not a flaw anywhere on Barbie's pink body except for a little statement on her bottom that says she's made in Hong Kong. And you see, when you give those dolls to a little girl who's 3 or 4 or 5 and she plays with them for 6 or 7 years, it sets up an image of what she'd better have when she's 13. And when she gets to be 13, she looks in the mirror, and no doubt about it, Barbie she ain't. And the gap between life as it is and life as it ought to be is dramatized by the perfection of that doll and all of those that she symbolizes. And even the creator of Barbie recognizes the impact and the negative aspects of it. But it's not just the beauty of Barbie that bothers me. It's the adolescent games that she inspires. You see, Barbie gets little girls into teenage things, into dating kinds of games, and getting married and having babies and taking camping trips, and hopefully in that order. But it gets them to think about all the adolescent stuff. And, you know, Barbie's miraculous boyfriend, Ken, who looks like Superman himself. And it just inspires a lot of adolescent things that I think is better to hold off on if at all possible. Why? Because it puts kids on an unnatural timetable coming across, see? And they're all wrapped up in things that ought to come 10 years later. And by the time they get to adolescence, they're ready for bigger and better things. If possible, hold it off. Watch Saturday morning television with your kids sometime and see how much of it is given to an adolescent theme. Even innocuous, relatively innocuous programs like Archie and his friends and things like that deal with adolescence. I think it's better to hold that off until your kids get there. Secondly, and more importantly, prepare your kids for adolescence. For at least 15 years, I have been recommending to parents and teachers that mothers take their daughters and fathers take their sons, although it can be reversed if circumstances warrant, you know, if the relationship is such. Take them away for a weekend. If you can't afford to go away for a weekend, then go to a park for a day. But get away one-on-one. Leave the other children at home and take them in that period immediately prior to puberty. in the period between 10 and 12, 13. It could be a little after that, but it's better right before puberty. And if you watch the signs, you can see puberty coming like a freight train. You know, the growth spurt is one of the main things that you watch for. When your kids really start shooting up at that age, puberty's right around the corner. And when they get modest, and when there's breast development and pubic hair, when you see these signs coming, it's getting late. Because in a few short months, it'll be very difficult to talk about some of the things that you need to talk about. Take them away on this trip for the day and tell them what's coming. See, we know that the teen years are uncomfortable. We know that that's a stressful time of life. We remember what it was for us. But it's amazing to me that we as parents keep that to ourselves and don't tell our kids. We don't share that with them. And when you do that, it's like sending them up the first dip of a roller coaster ride without telling them what waits at the top. And the trip down the other side can be harrowing for everybody on board. So I have recommended for a good while that you take this trip and in that day, tell them what to expect in the years that follow. All right, now what do you talk about on that day? Number one, probably most important, feelings of inferiority. Tell your preteen what feelings of inferiority are like. The feeling that nobody really likes me, and those who think they like me wouldn't if they really knew me. That I don't have any human worth, that everybody else is in the in group and I'm in the out group. Tell them that almost every teenager who ever lived struggles with these feelings. It's not just teenagers, people of all ages struggle with it, but it reaches a peak in early adolescence. That's what makes junior high so painful. Tell them that as they look around, it will look like they're the only ones that have these feelings, but that nearly everybody out there, even those laughing and joking and the football player and the homecoming queen, nearly all of them have great self-doubt during this time. Prepare your kids for this. You can help them see it as a temporary problem instead of a long-term lifestyle. And folks, I'm here to tell you it's going to happen to your kids. And if you have junior hires and beyond, it is more likely that they are going through it right now to one degree or another. And so are you, and so have I, because it's one of the facts of life in the Western culture particularly. I used to be a school psychologist in the Charter Oak Unified School District in Covina, 1963, 4 and 5. I was down on the high school campus one day walking across the grounds. The bell had rung, all the other students were back in class, and I was coming down the hall and I saw a young man coming toward me whose name was Danny. I didn't know him very well, but I knew he was a junior. I knew his last name. But nobody knew Danny very well. He was one of those hundreds of kids on any high school campus who you just don't get acquainted with. They hang back and they don't assert themselves. And when Danny was about 15 feet away from me, I saw that he was in trouble. And when he was about 8 feet away from me, our eyes locked. You get used to watching the faces of kids when you deal with them all the time. And I was watching him, and our eyes locked. And the moment he saw I was looking at him and that I saw he was in trouble, he dropped his eyes and he wouldn't look at me anymore. And that was a sure tip-off. And he came hurrying on past me. And when he got right alongside of me, he broke. He covered his face with both hands, and he wheeled to the wall. His neck turned red, his ears turned red, and he humped over, and he exploded. He didn't just cry. I mean, grief just flowed out of him. It was as though he had pushed it down and pushed it down and pushed it down until finally there was a moment of compassion between the two of us, and that's all it took, and he just fell apart. I put my arm around him. I said, "Danny, you feel like talking to me?" And he nodded that he did. And I practically had to lead him into my office, sat him down, closed the door, and gave him 2 or 3 minutes to talk because he could not even express himself. But he was a very eloquent young man. He did put his thoughts into words well, but he was not the kind of student that the other kids on campus would admire. He wasn't a football player. He wasn't good looking. He didn't have the kind of qualities that they admire. And he began to talk to me. And he said, "I've never tried to tell anybody this in my life. But he said, my parents moved to this school district 8 years ago. And he said, in 8 years' time, I've been working on one problem. He said, I started working on it the day we arrived, and I've worked on it right up to today. And he said, in 8 long years, I have never managed to make one single friend. He said, I walk to school by myself, and I walk home alone. I don't have anybody to walk with. I don't go to school activities. I don't go to football games and things because I don't have anybody to go with, and I'm embarrassed to sit there by myself. My phone never rings. Nobody ever calls me. He said, I don't have a girlfriend. I don't even have a boyfriend. And he said, I stand by myself at snack time like I did just now, all alone every day, and at lunch I eat by myself. And he said, I don't like my dad, and my mother does not understand me, and I fight with my sister. And he said, in the whole world, I don't have one soul who cares whether I live or die. And he said, sometimes I think I can't stand it anymore. Now, folks, it is very difficult to deal with those kind of problems, first, during the storms of adolescence, and secondly, within the confines of the school setting. I gave Danny the warmth of my affection, and I helped him, and we talked, and I think he was a lot better off when he went out than he came in. He had ventilated emotionally. He felt better about that, but I didn't solve his problem. And I knew it, and Danny knew it, and he took his problem out the door. See, what he needed was not my love as much as the love of the students, and I couldn't give it to him. You can't demand that people respect an individual on campus who's been rejected and left out, and I couldn't give him that. All I could give him was me, and I did, and Danny and I became very good friends. And whenever I was down on the high school campus, all I had to do was just walk across the grounds at lunchtime, and Danny would appear. I could count on it. From nowhere. He'd come out from those laughing, joking students, and he would follow me until the bell rung, talking and being together. In fact, I had about 10 or 12 Dannys, like disciples, who kind of followed me, and they all had the same problem, see? They all needed people, and they weren't successful with their peers, and I kind of was a substitute in that way, because everybody needs somebody. But somehow Danny managed to limp through that year. The following year, I was in the district office, and I received a phone call from the vice principal in charge of discipline. And he said, you know, I remember that you were friends with Danny last year. He called him by the last name. He said, he's a senior now. And he said, he did the strangest thing today, which I cannot explain, and I want you to explain to me what happened. He said, he, as you know, has never been a troublemaker. He's never gotten into any difficulty. As far as we know, he's never cut school. He just seems to be going along, getting along pretty well. And he said he was out in shop class today, and some of the boys were making fun of the way he looked. And he said, instead of taking it like a man, Danny picked up a knife and stabbed one of the boys. Now, he said, I cannot understand that. Explain to me why a kid who's just going through school and he's in his 4th year and everything seems to be going along pretty well, takes a little bit of pressure like that, and he would lose complete control and do something so violent. I don't understand that. Now, you see, folks, the vice principal had no way of knowing what had been gnawing on Danny for then 9 years, and probably a lot longer, because Danny didn't tell him. Danny didn't sit in his office and say, I have hated myself for all these years, and I can't stand it when they make fun of me. Instead, Danny sits with his head down. You see, now, Danny is not an isolated case. There are thousands of Dannys all around you. They're in your neighborhood, they're in your church, they're in every school, and they don't always stab somebody, but they do strange things that you can't explain. They don't talk. They keep their head down. They don't express their thoughts. You think they're not thinking? They're thinking just like you are. They just don't have the confidence to express it. Or they're on drugs to get away from themselves for a few minutes. Or they're using alcohol. Or they are suffering in other ways. They're conforming, or they act like a clown. Everything's funny. Slap on the back. Ha, ha, ha. Most of them have the same problem. And that is this great self-doubt that Danny had that he wasn't able to express. And I see it as a very common thing among young people, and something that you can help head off if you give a little attention to it. Now, what do they feel? What do kids feel when they feel inferior? First of all, let's use a very powerful word in the English language, one with a great deal of emotion attached to it. They feel ugly. Because in our culture, human worth is identified largely with regard to beauty. It is a lousy system of evaluating human worth that leaves a lot of have-nots, in fact, nearly all of us, because none of us are physically perfect. And yet, we began evaluating the worth of a child at birth on the basis of physical beauty. Have you noticed that? See, we weigh the worth of a child. What do you say about a very cute little 3-year-old girl? Boy, she's going to be a knockout. See, you're talking already about the sexual power that she has. He'll have to beat the girls off with a stick. See, there is already an awareness that this child is worth a little more than others. And it begins at the moment of birth. There are beauty contests for babies. So we can start rewarding the fortunate very early. And this is why, folks, it's not at all uncommon for a new mother to be very depressed shortly after the birth of her first child. Because newborns are, you know, sometimes pretty beat up. And she knew better. She knew better. I mean, if you'd talked to her, she knew better, but she somehow sort of expected about a 6-week-old winking, blinking Gerber baby. And when they hand her that red, wrinkled up, toothless, scrunched up, bald little creature, she often wants to send him back. Johnny Carson was laughing about this one night, about the delicate moment that occurs when a mother shows you a newborn child who's not very attractive, and what do you say? I mean, what do you say? There's only one thing she wants to hear. What is it? What a pretty baby. That is the only appropriate comment. Nothing else matters. The clothes, nothing matters. My, what a pretty baby. And it's kind of hard to say that at times. And he was talking about this delicate moment, and he said that he thought about it. There's not one safe thing that you can say at that moment except the one that he's come up with. And the only thing you can say is, my, that sure is a baby, isn't it? Anything else will get you in trouble. And it will, because there's great sensitivity there. You probably felt it too. Have you ever gone into the nursery after the birth of your first baby and looked through the window at all those babies along there and wondered how come yours was the only one that didn't have a round head? See, we evaluate worth. We actually look at those little children, and some are more valuable than others. And it's a lousy system of evaluating human worth. But children are very aware of it. And folks, if you're taking notes, this is something I would like to underline because it is extremely important. While parents eventually adjust to whatever the child has or doesn't have and begin to get on his team and try to help him in most cases, other people don't. And the unattractive child lives in a totally different world socially from the moment of birth forward than the attractive child, and every single social encounter throughout life is influenced by it, especially in the formative years when he's finding out who he is and who cares and what he's got to compete with. We saw again this illustrated in our home when our daughter Danae was 15 months of age. And at that time, Shirley dressed her attractively, and she's a cute little toddler. And when we took her in public places, she attracted a lot of attention. She had kind of flowing hair. And people would come over to her, and they'd pick her up, and they'd hold her, and they'd buy her candy, and they'd talk about their kids, and they'd laugh and chase her. And there's a lot of just natural warmth that took place between she and other people, not because she earned it, but because she triggered a response in other people. You know what I'm talking about. Your kids probably did the same thing. And you just kind of get used to that. You expect it when you walk into a restaurant that people are going to turn around and respond. Well, when she was 15 months of age, she rearranged all of that for the worst. I had been at the hospital all day. It's a 45-minute drive home, and I was coming home on the freeway, and Shirley could not call me. And when I drove into the driveway and parked my car, Shirley came out with Danae in her arms, and there was blood all over the front of Shirley's dress, blood all over the front of Danae's face. And it was obvious that something terrible had happened. Shirley quickly told me the details, that our little toddler was playing in the living room and learning to run, and we had carpet down. We'd just put down new carpet. And Shirley was chasing her, and they were laughing and playing. And Danae, at 15 months of age, was a little unsteady, and she was running full speed ahead, and she suddenly decided to go behind a chair, and she darted to the left, caught her foot in that carpet, lost her balance, and fell into the sharp edge of a table coming down. And all of her weight as a little toddler going full speed ahead came down on her face on that sharp edge, and more specifically on the left front tooth, drove it out of sight and raked its way up her face. And I mean in one instant, just like that. She went from a very cute little girl to a very unattractive little girl. And the cut, you see, was on the inside of the lip. And it didn't look like an accident. It looked like she was born that way. Now, we thought the tooth was knocked out, but it was not. It was up in the gums. And I hastened to the end of the story to tell you that through some miracle, the wounds healed. And the tooth did not die. It did not turn brown. It came in straight and dropped right back into place, and the other teeth straightened out, and everything returned to normal. And that tooth's been back up there 4 times, friends. She was determined to knock it out, and it was a sign of fantastic courage that that tooth hung on for about 4 or 5 years. And by the time she knocked it out, it was a status symbol to have lost the tooth and be the first one on the block to have lost a tooth. So it didn't matter much at about 5 years of age to be toothless. But I want to tell you, at 15 months of age, it was a long time till that second tooth was due. And she didn't look very good. I mean, she looked terrible. She looked like, you know, she'd had a head-on collision with a freight train. And because the cuts and so on were on the inside, it really looked like she was born that way. So she just went from this position of social attractiveness to unattractiveness very quickly for a very short period of time. Well, the next night, I'd kind of forgotten about it, and I took her with me to a store to buy something. I was standing there in line waiting to pay for it, and I don't know what I was thinking about. You know, you have more than one level of consciousness, but something over here was bothering me. And I remember turning to see what it was, and I saw instantly that there was something very different about the way people were responding to my little girl now as compared with before. See, instead of buying her candy and holding her and loving her and everything, people would look at her and then they'd turn away. Now, they weren't trying to reject her. They weren't trying to be mean to her. They wouldn't have hurt her for anything. They didn't see her. This is my point. If you and I were driving down the freeway in a car and I said, "What color car just went by?" You were looking right at it. You'd say, I don't know, I wasn't thinking about it. See, you don't see it. You were looking right at it, and you can't tell me what color it is. An unattractive child is like that. You see right past them. You don't see them. You're not trying to reject them. You just do not see them. And it irritated me greatly, folks, as I stood there and watched this, and it seemed so unfair, not only on behalf of my daughter at that moment, but on behalf of all children everywhere. It seemed unfair to reward a child for something that it didn't earn, and that's bad. But what's worse, to destroy or reject a child for something that's not his fault. And yet this is the value system of our culture, and it is very widespread. You take 2 children into a restaurant at 2 years of age, one's cute and one's not cute, and watch what the waitress will do. She'll gush all over one and leave the other one and his parents sitting there as though he doesn't exist. It is amazing to me how we evaluate human worth on this way. So, folks, if a child is too tall or too short or too fat or too thin, or his ears stick out, or his nose is hooked one way or another, or his hair isn't right, or he's got a tornado of freckles on his face, or his fanny's a little too big, or his feet are too big, it really does not matter what it is. If he has one flaw, all that it takes is for other children who are amazingly creative in this regard to identify a nickname, to spotlight that one flaw, and he becomes the flaw, and self-esteem starts to deteriorate. And these nicknames are amazing. Again, when Danae was born, we thought the least we could do in our own behalf was find her a name that the other children couldn't distort, because they'll take a name and twist it around and make it something dirty and beat the kid over the head with it. And so we gave a lot of thought to that. 9 months we considered that. Ran it through the computer, analyzed it, and finally came up with the name Danae, D-A-N-A-E, Danae. Perfectly safe, nothing you can do with it. We hung it on her. Kids out in the front yard a few years later were calling her Decay. Can't beat it. Can't beat it. The creativity's incredible. They find a choice name. This kid across the street from us named Michael. This kid was 5 by 5 when he was 3 years of age. He was on the move. I've never seen a child like that in my life. The big kid stayed out of his way because he was dangerous. And the kids in the neighborhood named him Michael the motorcycle. Folks, if you knew him, that is the most appropriate nickname. If there ever was a Honda in tennis shoes, that's Michael. But they will find a nickname, and a child knows it, and he's aware of it, and then it begins to build and grow. As he comes into adolescence, it reaches a peak. You and I don't escape it either, folks. We have the same kind of pressure on us, only as we get a little older, see, youthfulness becomes paramount. Where in order to be a valuable human being, I've got to stay eternally young. And that's kind of hard to do. In fact, that irritates me a great deal, probably because I'm now 42 years of age. I would be 43, but I was sick a year. Folks, there are 4 billion people on the face of this earth, 4 billion of us, and every single one of us is aging. There's not a single exception anywhere on the earth. If you're not aging, you're in real trouble. 4 billion of us, and every one of us is aging, yet I'm supposed to feel guilty if it happens to me. And how ridiculous that is. For the natural, normal process of aging, why should I feel guilty? And I can't hold it back anyway. You know, it happens so quickly. About the time your face clears up, your mind gets fuzzy. It bothers me so much that Madison Avenue sells that nonsense to us, that we've got to be physically perfect and eternally young in order to be emotionally stable and in order to like ourselves, yet we're sold that in ways we don't even realize. Have you all seen that little ad that has been running for, must be 20 years now? Always the same thing. It must be a highly effective ad which shows 4 women about 50 years of age playing cards, right? You seen it? The 4 women are playing, and 3 of them are really having a good time. Smiles on their face, and they're holding their cards, and the 4th one is in agony. Remember seeing it? And she's pulled back like this, and she's got this look of absolute terror on her face because she's got a problem. What's her problem? You've seen it. She's got an age spot. You got that, an age spot, folks. And it's not just an age spot. It is a certain kind of age spot. It's always an adjective with it. What do they call it? Horrid age spot. Horrid, folks. Now, really, in terms of all the troubles of the world, a freckle on the hand couldn't rank very high. Yet there she is in absolute misery because right on her paw out there, where everybody can see it, is an identifiable, undeniable flaw. She has a freckle on the hand. Can you believe that? Horror of horrors. And yet that's what we're sold. I just now walked over there and picked up this little ad I tore out of McCall's magazine. Folks, this is crude. I wouldn't ordinarily read you something like this, but it illustrates my point. And this is what it says. Now brace yourself for this tragedy. In big red letters, it says, nobody wants stretch marks. Now, I think that's a safe assumption. It says, now here's the sad testimonial that we're going to hear. A woman says, I've had 2 children. And get the next line, but I am so unhappy with the stretch marks on my legs, body, and bust. They make me feel ashamed. Don't you know she's a joy to live with? Folks, let me draw some assumptions about that lady. She's got 2 children, so she's probably pretty young. And let's just assume that this is the good time of life. It probably is. Let's assume she's happily married. I doubt it, but let's assume it. you see, here she is in the prime of her life, probably the healthiest time of her life. And if the truth were known, it's kind of depressing, but physically it's downhill from here on. You know, there are diseases and problems coming, ending in death for all of us. This is the good time. These are the good years. These are the years with your children. These are the years when she has the strength and energy to do what she needs to do, and yet she is so unhappy and so ashamed because she's got a flaw somewhere on her pink body. That is what we are sold, and teenagers, above all else, buy it. They believe it. You know why? Because during the teen years, the only source of self-worth is your acceptability to the opposite sex. See, if the boys are loved by the girls, they feel pretty good about it. And if the girls are loved by the boys, they feel pretty good about it. And if you're not, the sky has fallen and self-esteem goes down the drain. Very quickly, secondly, they feel dumb. We're all caught in that trap, and that we're part of society. We are taught those values, and we can hardly escape them. It's like trying to walk upstream against the Colorado River. Everything's going the other way. No one is opposing this, but this is one I'd like to see us take a good hard look at. Kids also feel dumb. They feel unnecessary and unneeded because of that. I'm not referring to an IQ score here. I'm referring to what happens in the classroom from the very beginning, the very early years. What takes place there? So many of our kids come out feeling unintelligent. They have trouble learning to read. They learn that they're going to go to school to learn to read, and then they get there and don't. How many of you are teachers? May I see the hands of you who are teachers? We got a good representation. Let me give you just one example of that, okay? Have you, those of you who are at the elementary school level, ever heard yourself standing before, say, a third grade class, or maybe second, and saying, okay, class, we're going to play a math game. That's a good way to drill, and so in order to compete, we're going to choose teams. And so the teacher reaches out, and she takes Johnny and Mary, the ever-popular co-favorites, and they move to the two sides of the room, and she says, now what I want you to do, Mary, you're going to choose first, and we'll choose teams, and then we'll compete with each other. And so, Mary, you go ahead. Well, Mary reaches out, and she takes the reigning intellectual superstar in the class. Mary hadn't seen the IQ scores, but Mary knows who's bright. Everybody knows who's bright. And that child moves to the side of the room with his captain. Okay, Johnny, you take the next one. And Johnny takes the second brightest kid in the room, and Mary takes the third brightest, and Johnny takes the fourth, and the group is shrinking. It's getting smaller and smaller. And there's a little bit of tension that begins to be developed in the air because the kids are aware, if the teacher isn't, that somebody is about to be humiliated. And they continue to choose, and it's down to 10, and the tension is greater. And then it's down to 5. And those 5 who remain all have a silly little grin on their face because they don't know what to say. How do you explain the fact that you're not chosen for something that takes intelligence? And they knew they wouldn't be chosen anyway. And they're all going like this when Johnny's choosing. And then when Mary chooses, they all go like that. Have you ever seen kids do that? See, they know whose team they want to be on, but more importantly, they want to be chosen because there is disaster about to occur to somebody. And then it's down to 3. And if you could measure all 3 of those kids, you'll find that their little hearts are going dum, 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 dum. And their hands are sweating a little, and their mouth is dry, and their eyes are reflecting the anxiety. And then it's down to 2, and then 1. And that one that's left is a little kid named Arnie, and he slides down in his backbone, and he's been thinking, somebody take me. Won't somebody take me? But there ain't any chance of anybody taking him. Arnie can't even read, much less do math. Who's going to choose him? They come all the way to the end, and Mary says, you take him, and Johnny says, no, you take him. And the teacher says, Arnie, would you go over here? And then, just like everybody knew he would, guess who fouls up? Guess who causes his team to lose, and everybody says, boo, Arnie. Guess who has to come back and sit down? And guess who wishes that he could crawl in a hole and just die? If he could get away somehow. He did what he knew he would do. It happened yesterday, and it'll happen tomorrow. And you see, the trouble with Arnie is that he doesn't have any explanation for it. When you fail or when I fail, I say, yeah, but don't forget I'm at the hospital and I wrote this book and I had these successes and I know some people that like me. See? Not many, but a few. When you fail, you have those same rationalizations. Arnie has never done anything right in his life. He doesn't have any successes to balance it with. All he knows is that it works for everybody else and it doesn't work for me. And then guess who, folks, about 30 years later, will be such an incredible bore, such an uncreative, incredible bore, and there won't be anybody there to tell him that his light went out in the 3rd grade. Self-esteem crumbled because of learning difficulties. At least half the kids come out of our school feeling dumb. I'm convinced of that, probably more than that. Even some who are bright come out feeling dumb because of the matter of underachievement and constant failure. Did you know, folks, that you can take a fish, a walleyed pike, in fact, and put him in a tank of water with some minnows in it, and in a short time, the walleyed pike will be in the tank all by himself because he does his thing with the minnows. And you get to feeding him, and he gets to eating the minnows, and when he gets used to that, slide a piece of glass down the center of the tank and put the walleyed pike on one side and put the minnows then on the other. And the walleyed pike can see the minnows, but he can't see the glass. And so he comes after them like he's been doing. And inevitably, you see, he hits the front of that glass and bounces back. Well, that's strange to him. That never happened before. Who knows what in the world goes on in the mind of walleyed pike. He'll swim around a little bit, and he'll take another run at it. Only the second time, he'll swim a little slower than the first time. And he hits that glass and bounces back again. He swims around, that's curious, can't explain it. They were there yesterday, what's going on? And he waits a little longer and swims a little slower and hits the glass again and bounces back. He will continue that process each time waiting longer and each time swimming slower until finally the behavior is extinguished. He does not know how to explain it. I just can't get him. Not available. At that point, having not tried anymore, you slide the glass out of the tank and put it aside and let the minnows swim in and around the walleyed pike. But he's already got the message. They're not available. I saw them before and couldn't get them. How come I can't get them now? No chance. And the walleyed pike will stay there with his favorite kind of food right in front of him, even bumping him on the gills. And he will starve to death in a tank of water filled with the kind of food he likes best because his behavior has been extinguished. Now, folks, intelligence is related to worth. And when you take a little first grader and he toddles off to school on his wobbly legs carrying a little Mickey Mouse lunch bucket, and he's anxious to get there, and he's a little immature fellow, and he's so vulnerable, and he gets there and he's excited, and they're going to have a spelling bee, and they're going to climb a mountain. There's a big chart on the wall, and each right word, and he moves up toward the top of the mountain. And everybody else is almost up, and he's still on the ground floor. Hits the glass and bounces back. Maybe he's in the 2nd or 3rd grade, and he had a little test, and he went home. He really tried. He honestly tried. Didn't give it much, but he doesn't have much in the way of self-discipline, and he came back and he tried. And maybe, this doesn't happen very often, but maybe an insensitive teacher puts a 0 or a sad face or an F on his paper, and maybe as she's handing it back, she allows 3 kids around him to see it, and they snicker. Boom, he hits the glass and bounces back. Brings home a bad report card, and his dad slams his fist down on the table and says, "Stupid, why can't you be like your sister?" He hits the glass and bounces back. I tell you, folks, it doesn't take much of that for a very young child to decide it's not available. It's okay for those guys. I don't understand it, but I can't have it. And self-esteem starts to disintegrate, especially in those vulnerable early years. And I think we have to be very careful about failure in the early years of school. Now, it's very interesting to me, friends, that these 2 factors, physical attractiveness and intelligence, represent the 2 main things on which we evaluate human worth in our culture. And it's also interesting to me that physical attractiveness is number 1 and intelligence is number 2 in the early years. As males in our society go through adolescence, then physical attractiveness, and under that I include athletic ability, which is a dimension of the physical, drops to 2nd place, and intelligence emerges as number one through the rest of life. For females in our society, despite the women's liberation movement and all that influence, it still remains pretty much physical attractiveness number one, intelligence number two throughout life. The reason the average woman would rather have beauty than brains is because she knows the average man can see better than he can think. Only half of you were clapping, and I know which half. Third, what else do kids feel when they feel inadequate and inferior? They feel unloved. Maybe that's really the essence of it. Physical attractiveness, intelligence, and love. Those are the things we base worth on in our society. And the question is what you do for those who are getting ready to come into adolescence. Folks, you cannot head off all feelings of inferiority, and you won't, nor must you. I think kids profit from some of these feelings, and it is not necessary to eliminate them all. My two toughest years of life were the 7th and 8th grades. In fact, the only two tough years of my life were the 7th and 8th grades, with the exception of this year, which has been very difficult for us. But those 2 years, 7th and 8th grades, have contributed more to what I approve of in myself today than any other 2 years of my life. My desire to help people, my desire to accomplish something, my desire to go on to school, a lot of things, my understanding of kids, a lot of things grew out of those years. So you can't prevent it all. So what I am recommending is that you talk to your kids prior to adolescence and just brace them for it, so that when it comes, they realize I'm not the only one and it won't last forever. And to minimize the power of it. And you can do that, I think, I wrote about this in Hide or Seek in 1974. And if I were writing that book today, there was one main feature that I would add to it that's really not there, having to do with this matter of talking about and diffusing feelings of inferiority from the early years. I think you would be wise, folks, to start talking about inferiority with your 3-year-olds. Start with confidence. Start talking about confidence, about the fact that they got up in front of the whole church in the Christmas party and had the confidence to hold the head up and talk. That showed that you like yourself. And then a little later on, talk about inferiority. When you see somebody that can't look at you when he talks, and he's got his head down, and his eyes are kind of sad, and his fingernails are all chewed off. When you see people that are showing signs of inferiority, ask your children, what do you think they're feeling? Maybe they're doing that because they don't like themselves, and then get into inferiority. Explain what it is so that it's not like a dragon jumping on them from behind when they come into the teen years. We need a break. I do, you do. Let me meet as many of you as want to come down, and let's take about 15 or 20 minutes.
Dr. Dobson, I have this 15-year-old who's rebelling right now. How do I handle it?
Have you read A Strong-Willed Child? There is a chapter on adolescence which summarizes about everything I know about that question. There is a limited power that you have at that point to immediately change the situation. There are some things you can do, and I put all that I know in there, and I really mean that, because the truth of the matter is, if a 15-year-old wants to take you, he can beat you. In this culture and in this society, if a 15-year-old does not want to obey, wants to leave home, wants to get pregnant, wants to get an abortion, wants to tell you to take a flying leap, they can do it. And there has to be a certain tacit agreement that the child is going to yield ultimately to your leadership, or else they can take you. And I have outlined in that book about 40 pages of how I think you can go about best maximizing your chances of getting that leadership, how you express it to the child, how to bluff, because it does involve some bluffing. And beyond that, you pray for age 20.
This concludes the first half of the Preparing for Adolescence presentation. Dr. Dobson will continue his discussions on teen experiences in Part 5 of the series. See you next time. Dr. James Dobson has indicated that the best opportunity to disarm the teenage time bomb occurs about 10 years before it arrives, that all of childhood is a preparation for adolescence and beyond. The values and attitudes and faith that we build into our children throughout the early years are bound to be tested, especially during the teen era. Dr. Dobson recommends that parents consciously prepare their children for the experiences to come. The final event of this instructional process should occur during a weekend trip immediately prior to puberty. In the previous film of this Focus on the Family series, Dr. Dobson describes the first of 6 major topics that should be discussed on this Preparing for Adolescence outing. That of low self-esteem, which is so common during the teen years. Now, in the film you're about to see, he presents the 5 remaining topics, focusing on peer pressure and adolescent sexuality. Let's join Dr. James Dobson in Laurie Auditorium.
Number 2, the second thing you talk to your kids about on that trip is conformity. Show them how these two are directly linked together. The more inferior you feel, the less you can withstand the pressure of the group. And this is why teenagers move in such a herd. And they do move in a herd. Especially teenage choirs. Have you ever seen a teenage choir where every child looked exactly the same? All the girls, you know, there's a million ways you can fix the hair. All of them have it identical, exactly the same. Right now it's parted in the middle and kind of flared back like this, like Farrah Fawcett Majors does hers. Incidentally, when you're talking about inferiority and the physical features and everything, tell them no one is physically perfect and everybody's aware of their flaws. Even Farrah Fawcett Majors is aware of her flaws. She said she had too big a mouth the other day. Did you read that? I never really noticed. But she's inspired this current hairstyle that it's starting to fade now, but it comes down across the shoulders. All the girls look just like that. Choirs are models of conformity. Maybe you read in the paper about a teen choir down in Miami that was singing the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And that's an emotional song, and boy, they were going at it. And they were singing Glory, Glory, Hallelujah. And they got so excited that one of the little girls down in the front row really got carried away. It's kind of warm, and she passed out. Boom, hit the deck over here. Well, the director had put a lot into the program, and he didn't want to blow the whole show. So he just went on directing, and they gathered around this little girl and tried to get her back together. But the possibility of fainting had been planted in 67 other impressionable heads. And it wasn't about 2 minutes till a kid blanched and buckled and disappeared from the back row. Now you got a trend going, see? You got 2. Number 3, in a few seconds, fell off this end of the risers. And it started to spread through that crowd. And by the time they reached the final, His Truth is Marching On, 20 kids lay flat on the ground. That's called conformity. Now, you see, it's very important that you take this opportunity on this trip that you're taking with your kids to show how feelings of inferiority and conformity combine to create disasters for them. Set up a little scene which is more than likely to occur for your child in this way. Johnny, let's suppose that you're now 15 years of age instead of 12. And let's suppose that you're in the back seat of a car and the driver of the car is 16 and he's the only one in your group that has a car. And every now and then he comes and he picks up his friends and they go riding in the evening. And you really are flattered to be one of those kids that he picked up. He didn't have to get you, but he did. And you're glad to be included. And you're having a lot of fun. And you want to be liked by that group a great deal because this is the in group at school and you want to be one of them. And you're sitting in the back seat over on the left-hand side. And this kid named Jack who's driving, you see, is kind of the leader and everybody looks up to him. And you all are laughing and you're joking and having a good time. And Jack then reaches into his pocket and he takes out a little bottle of red pills. And you know what those are. Those are called Reds. And that's drugs. And you don't want to use them. You know that they're harmful to your body. Yet Jack takes one and puts it in his mouth, and everybody says, hey, big deal. And then he passes it over to the guy next to him, over by the window. And he takes one. He doesn't think anything about it, puts it in his mouth. The bottle is passed into the back seat. You hoped it wouldn't be, but it was. And here it comes. Now, it's over there by that window. And he's taking one, and you're very nervous because it's coming your way. And you're going to have to make a decision. And the one next to the window over there takes one of those pills, and the guy in the middle takes it, and you got a little sweat on your hands. Your mouth is dry, and your heart's thumping. And what are you going to do? Are you going to go along, or are you not going to go along? You've got to make a decision. You don't have any time to think. You can't say, let me out. I'll give you an answer in an hour. I'll go talk to somebody. I'll talk to my pastor. I'll pray about it. You can't say anything. You've got to make a decision. And here it comes. And finally, they hand it to you. And everybody's laughing. And your hands are shaking a little bit. And you reach out, not knowing what to say, and you take it. You know it's not right. You know it's not what God wants you to do. You know it's harmful to your body. And it's not even what you want. But do you have the courage, because of these feelings, to say, I will be different? And so you say to yourself, well, I've always wanted to know what drugs were all about anyway, and I'll just do it this one time. And after all, it's not heroin. It's just a little red pill, and it's probably no big deal, and I'll just do it this once. Johnny, doing it once makes it very, very easy to do it twice. And twice makes it easy to do it 3 times. And furthermore, the kind of guys that will hand that to you will also hand you something else later. Because when you're running in that crowd, it's going to happen again. And that's exactly how a lot of kids go down the path of drugs. And you're going to have to decide right now if you're going to conform or not. Johnny, this is why the Bible says, be not conformed to this world. That's why that message is in the Bible, because conformity can destroy you, not only with regard to drugs, but sex and alcohol and a lot of other things that you know are not right and are harmful. And it's your opportunity to brace him for that moment, so when it occurs, he immediately thinks, this is what Dad was talking about, or this is what my mother was explaining. Number 3, let's pick up the pace. Neat thing about this blackboard, you can't erase it. Don't know if you can read that or not. Talk to your kids about the meaning of love. They don't know what love is. They think love's a warm feeling. They think the first time they go on that emotional roller coaster ride at the peak that'll last forever. They don't know that it cannot last. Even when you genuinely love somebody, there are times when you are very much in love, and there are times when you're relatively apathetic, and there are times when you don't like each other. Let's admit that, can we? And it's not a disaster that it happens. Feelings come and go and come and go. Well, what holds you steady in a genuine love relationship is not the feeling. That's the caboose on the train. See, the feeling goes like this. If you depend on the feeling, then you're going to get a divorce about every 28 days, I would suggest. I was talking to my Sunday school class about this, and about how some kids get married on this emotional high up here before they've even had a chance to experience the first low. And I asked one guy in my class, they're about 30 years of age, I suppose, they asked him why he got married so young, and he said, because I didn't know about that wiggly line till it was too late. What holds you steady in the emotional ups and downs of life? Commitment holds you steady. Because my mother is here today, I want to read something to you. I didn't really intend to do this till this morning. I happen to have it with me. This is what my dad said to my mother 43 years ago. This was not written to her, it was said to her, and he came home and wrote it down. And a few years ago, he was out there in California, and he took a crumpled piece of paper out of his pocket and said, you might find this interesting. Now, this is written in formal language because that's the way my dad thought and talked and wrote. But this is what he said to her before they were married. I want you to understand and be fully aware of my feelings considering the marriage covenant which we are about to enter. I have been taught at my mother's knee and in harmony with the Word of God that the marriage vows are inviolable and that by entering into them, I am binding myself absolutely and for life. The idea of estrangement from you through divorce for any reason at all, although God permits one, infidelity, will never at any time be allowed to enter into my thinking. I'm not naive in this. On the contrary, I'm fully aware of the possibility, unlikely as it now appears, that mutual incompatibility or other unforeseen circumstances could result in extreme mental suffering. If such becomes the case, I am resolved for my part to accept it as a consequence of the commitment that I'm now making, and to bear it, if necessary, to the end of our lives together. I have loved you dearly as a sweetheart, and I will continue to love you as my wife. But over and above that love, over and above the feeling, I love you with a Christian love that demands that I never react in any way toward you that would jeopardize our prospects of entering heaven, which is the supreme objective of both our lives. And I pray that God Himself will make our affection for one another perfect and eternal. Isn't that beautiful? That's called commitment. Number 4. That's called planning. The strain between generations, it is inevitable. Talk to your kids about it. Tell them it's coming. Tell them that they've been a little boy, a little girl, and they'll soon be a grown adult, and this is an in-between stage, and there could be a little tension between us because usually during this time of life, kids want their parents to let them go faster than they ought to. And I'm going to let you go. I'm not going to hold you down. I want you to be mature. I want you to be on your own. And very shortly, you will make all your own decisions. I will not try to force it on you. You may not believe that, but our relationship will soon change. And instead of it being parent-child, it will be friend-friend. And that's coming, and I want it. But you may want it to come too early. Most kids do. You still want us to pay the insurance and keep the shirts ironed in the closet and have all the food on the table and keep your car running and all that, but you don't want any restrictions, and it doesn't work that way. Responsibility and freedom go together. So there may be a strain here, and if it comes, really don't worry about it, because I love you and you love me, and we're going to live through this thing, and we're going to work together, and I'll listen to you, and I'll compromise where I can, and when I can't compromise, you're just going to have to live with it, but it'll grow out of love. See, I think you can, again, sort of pacify those years. And when it occurs, folks, we should not panic as adults, because I think some of that rebellion is necessary and perhaps healthy, as I said last night. The trouble is, adolescents have an uncanny way of hurting those near to them, everyone involved. Have you ever had your kids say to you, I didn't ask to be born? Have you ever heard that one before? Johnny Carson was talking about that. I get a world of information from Johnny Carson. He said his kid said that to him, and he said, it's a good thing you didn't ask. I'd have said no. Folks, I got to tell you something. There was a medical student that graduated in Los Angeles. This is honest truth, it's not just a story. And he had to go through an internship program that required him to go through 4 hospitals, one of which was a hospital for the emotionally ill. But he had very little orientation to mental illness and didn't really understand it at all. And it was his belief that the people who are psychotic, where there's a break with reality, really could be benefited a great deal by you just sitting down and explaining that what they believe was not possible. And so there was a fellow at this hospital who believed himself to be dead. And he went around telling everybody that, and he said, yeah, that's true, I'm dead. I've been dead for years. And so the intern figured he'd have a little conversation with him, and he'd straighten him all out. And he sat down, and he said, I understand you think you're dead. Is that right? And the guy said, yeah, that's true, I'm dead. Been dead a long time. He said, tell me something. Do dead people bleed? And the schizophrenic thought for a minute. He said, of course not. Everybody knows that. Dead people don't bleed. So the intern took his hand and his thumb and put a little needle in it and squeezed the thumb, and some blood came out. And schizophrenic looked at that, and he said, well, what do you know? Dead people do bleed. Folks, those kind of conversations are inevitable during adolescence. When you try to explain why they can't have a car on Friday night, you can't reason your way out of that. Or why there isn't enough money to buy that $70 sweater. Or why it is necessary for you to do certain things. You can't reason your way out. And there'll come a time where this conflict, I think, is inevitable, and you just got to try to live through it and hope for the 20s. Number 5, the search for identity. And I'm going to just leave that completely. Just let it stand right where it is in the interest of time and talk to you about a more important one. I don't know whether you can read that mess or not. That says puberty. Talk to your kids about the meaning of puberty. Now, by that, I'm not referring to the birds and bees and all that stuff, because your kids probably know that better than you do by this point. They have so much information available to them now that I didn't have when I was a kid, and you probably didn't either. Shirley and I were watching television the other day with our kids where a actual filmed birth was shown at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on television, and we watched it with our kids. We thought that would be constructive for them, and they, I think, benefited a great deal from it. I would have never been able to see that. That would never have been put on television when I was a kid. I was interested in Ryan's reaction to it because it really involved quite a bit of blood and a lot of things that shocked him quite a bit. And he just sat and didn't say anything. Just sat with his eyes glued on the set. And when it was all through, he gave a one-word assessment. He said, sick. I'm not talking about all that stuff. I'm talking about telling your kids, your pre-adolescent kids, about the meaning of puberty, that time of sexual awakening that's coming. It's right around the corner. And trying to get them ready for it. And letting them know that their body is going to change radically very shortly. And kids don't know this. And they fall into 2 large groups. There's the first group that has problems for which puberty arrives before they were expecting it. And in fact, folks, the real problem results from the wide age range at which puberty can come. It can arrive, you see, as early as 9 or 10 for some girls, and as late as 17 or 18 for some boys. And that wide range really creates problems. Now, the early maturing child suddenly begins to change, and they wonder, what in the world is going on here? They think they have cancer. They think that all kinds of disasters are befalling them, and they often won't ask anybody because they're too embarrassed at that time. So that group has some problems, but the late maturing group has much greater problems. The whole world is designed to assault the self-esteem of the late maturing child. A boy is 16, and everybody else has grown up, and he hasn't. And his voice hadn't changed, and everybody else has changed. He picks up the phone, and he talks to the operator, and she calls him ma'am. Or a girl is maybe 13 or 14, and all of her friends have rounded out, and she's still just as flat as a board, and she knows that. And man, the tension is so great at that time. It's just incredible. And you see, we come along and accentuate the problem by requiring junior high kids to take gang showers. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes we can make. Because at the junior high level, at that age, you have little boys in with grown men and little girls in with grown women. And you forget how vicious junior hires are. They don't keep that information to themselves at all. What they've observed in the shower, they go tell all their friends of the opposite sex. And they point and they make names. And boy, that can be so painful. And I've had kids sit before me and say, kick me out of school, send me to Siberia, call my parents, put me in jail. You do anything you want to with me, but I will never again take a shower after PE. And I have to say to those kids, I understand, you won't have to. It's not nearly as important at the high school level to have stall showers as it is at the junior high level, where you have this wide age range and where kids are so aware of their differences. And such pressure to grow up. Girls stuff their bra with all kinds of stuff, Kleenex and all that sort of thing. I remember in our high school, the best developed girl in our high school made the mistake of going to the senior swim party, and the truth about Mary Jane floated to the surface. Your kids need to know, folks, that they're going to grow up, because they don't know that. Your late maturing kids need to know. So tell them before adolescence that there is a little gland in the center of the head about the size of the end of your finger called a pituitary. And if we could look at your pituitary, there'd be a little calendar in it. Doesn't look like a calendar, it looks like chemicals, but locked in those chemicals is a plan for your body. We don't know what it says, but it is designed by God, and you will grow up. We all grow up. If you don't believe it, look at all the adults around you. You see any of them that look like little kids? None of them look like little kids. Your dad, he has that deep bass voice. You think he always had that? You think when he was in the crib, he said, goo, goo? They all grow up, and you will grow up too. It may be early, it may be in the middle, it may be late. If it's late, you may be uncomfortable for a time, but hang on. It will happen to you. It will come for you as well. Now, folks, I'm going to wade fearlessly at this moment into one of the most delicate and emotionally powerful words in the English language. We talked about one this morning, the word ugly. We're going to talk about one now that's at least to the power of 5 greater than that one. Talk to your pre-adolescent boys especially about the meaning of masturbation, because I am here to tell you it is going to happen. It's going to happen. There is no question about it. The research on this subject is crystal clear. Something between 95 and 98% of the boys masturbate at some time or another during adolescence, and the rest lie, I'm told. And something over 50% of the girls do, but usually with less regularity and usually with less intensity. There's great difference sexually between males and females in the adolescent year, all the way through, but especially in adolescence. Where boys at that age, let's talk about girls. Girls at that age are more stimulated and interested in crushes and romantic kinds of attachments to a particular individual, and the fantasy life of marrying that person or being with that person, or now, today, living with that person. Those are the kind of things that frequently go on in a girl's mind. A boy at that age is aflame with passion over the physical body of any attractive girl. And the sex drive is stronger between 16 and 18 for boys than at any other age in life. It is a raging fire that will find expression. And it does not matter what you do about it, it will happen. Christians, it will happen in your home. And you can take all of the traditional approaches to it, to stop it, that you want, and they don't work. You can send your boys off to the gymnasium for lots of exercise and a cold shower every night and light bed clothing and just all kinds of these things, and nothing works. It's going to happen. It is virtually inevitable. It is a developmental phase that's going to take place. Now, folks, I really feel that I need to deal with this subject rather straightforwardly because so few people will do it within the Christian community. It is an untouchable topic, and we've been afraid to discuss it, but we must because the kids are at stake. And let's talk about it. Now, let me discuss it, first of all, from a medical, psychological point of view, and then let's look at it very quickly from the moral aspect. First of all, research on this subject is clear, just almost no controversy, and that's unusual in any scientific field, that masturbation is harmful in only 3 circumstances that I know of. Only 3 times that I know of that it's harmful. First, when it is associated with unrelenting and incalculable guilt. That kind of guilt will eat you alive no matter what the subject matter. And folks, this is why I bring it up to you here today, because it's my experience that children within the evangelical community especially suffer unimaginable guilt over their absolute inability to control this urge. And I use those words advisedly. For many boys, it is absolutely uncontrollable. And here's the process that takes place, and I've seen this too many times, and I feel it very deeply, and I know it's dangerous to bring up a controversial subject like this and all of that, but I feel an obligation to do so. The process is that a boy who loves God, and a girl too, this is not exclusively a masculine thing, will go before the Lord and say, Lord, I've done this horrible thing. Please forgive me. It's awful. I'm a wretched sinner. Please make me clean again. And there is that oneness and that closeness that comes when God and man are united in that beautiful moment. And he says, I will never do that again, Lord. And he's never been more determined. And then a week goes by, and 2 weeks go by, and 3 weeks go by, and 4. And now he's into the 2nd month, perhaps. Who knows how long? Maybe 2 days go by. But sooner or later, you see, the hormonal pressure gets greater. It builds. That's another difference between males and females. In males, there's an accumulating hormonal pressure over time. And the pressure gets greater, and the mechanism that God designed becomes all-encompassing, so that it fills his world, and he dreams about it by night, and he thinks about it by day. And just being in the company of a girl, it does not even have to be an attractive girl, sets off the mechanism. And folks, sooner or later, it happens again. See? 2 or 3 minutes in a moment of weakness, it's just too available, and it happens again. And then, folks, what do you say to God when you've just broken your 300th promise to him? What do you say when you go back before him? Guilt enormous, eternal damnation hanging over you. This is an incredible pain that kids go through. And I've seen them suffer with it. And why I tell you about it is I've seen us lose them to God in the church because that pain is so great, they got to do something to get away from it. And frequently they will convince themselves of atheism or who knows what just to escape that pain. Had a chaplain of a large Christian college who told me on the basis of his counseling, which he does all day long, that it is his belief that most of the spiritual despair that occurs among the men of his campus result from their inability to gain victory over this habit. It is all-encompassing. So first, has to do with guilt. Secondly, it is harmful when it occurs in a group. And the reason I think it's harmful when it occurs in a group is because sexual energy in early adolescence is not very well fixed. Freud called it a homosexual phase. I don't believe that. But there is a time when the object of sexual interest is not well fixed on the opposite sex. And I'm convinced that some homosexuality, I can't prove this, this is my belief, hypothesis. Some homosexuality begins by perhaps roommates or at campmates or something of that nature catching each other, masturbating during that time, and making a group thing out of it. And then it's not very difficult to rechannel sexual energy. See, this is why homosexuality spreads. This is why it's not a constant from society to society. It varies. There are some societies where it's much greater. And one of the reasons is that there's a time in a boy's life when he can be turned in that regard. And so I see that as harmful. Thirdly, the third time that I think it's harmful is when it continues into marriage, and instead of being an adolescent experience, it becomes a substitute for what God intended between a husband and a wife. And folks, that is very, very common. The incidence of masturbation representing a substitute for sex in marriage is estimated to be as high as 30%. And I think that, again, that's very harmful because this is what the Bible talks about not defrauding one another. See, we have an obligation to meet each other's needs. And when a person has reverted to an adolescent avenue, then the other person's needs are not being met. And that's the third occasion where it's thought to be harmful. You know something's very interesting to me at this moment. I got to tell you something. I'm thinking it, you might as well know what I'm thinking. I watch a crowd very carefully. I really do. I see everything goes on in a crowd this size. You may not believe it, but I do. And there are two things that I pay attention to in a crowd. There are two bits of information that I get from you that let me know whether you're with me or not, or whether you're bored with what I'm doing. Because if you're bored, then I might as well be doing something else. The first is yawns. I see every yawn that goes on. And a yawn is an abomination to a speaker. You cannot yawn and listen to me at the same time. It's impossible. And I hate yawns, and I want to tell you, there were 4 of you that yawned this morning, and I have all 4 of your names. If I see 3 yawns in a row, I'll stop, and we'll do something else. Well, the second bit of information that I pay attention to is surface noise. When you are very interested, let's put it the other way, when you're not interested in what I'm saying, you don't get up and walk out, most of you, but you shuffle and you move and you cough and you whisper, and it comes through to me as a high level of racket. But when you're very interested, it gets very quiet. And when I was talking about that last subject, I could hear you breathing on the back row. Want to know why? You know why you got so quiet? Because this is where we live. We are sexual creatures. That's not our design. That's God's design. He made us that way. And it's a subject of intense interest. And the moment it comes up, a hush falls on a crowd. Now, folks, if it is that important to us, it is much more important to our immature adolescents. And we must have the courage to deal with it. I just caught a man yawning. And he nearly choked when I saw him. Folks, I want to share something with you. I get a lot of mail. I get mail on this subject. The real reason I raised that topic with you is because I'm not just talking about kids, I'm talking about us too. And there is a great deal of guilt associated with this act even yet. This is a letter that came from a woman. I don't want to take the time to read that. Let me read you another one. I got another one here that illustrates it even better. She said, "Dear Dr. Dobson, I'm writing this letter in the hopes that you will help me. If we were face to face, I would never tell you what I need to get out of my system." I'm not going to read you the whole letter, and it's very personal. She said, "Just help me, please." Notice the pain and the guilt and the intensity of this issue. This problem, and she's talking about the same thing, has caused me torment and heartache for the past 25 years. I've begged God, and now I'm begging you, please help me. Let me go to the end of the letter. She says, "I am tormented, and my family is starting to suffer more and more for it. I am very ashamed of my great weakness. And as I said, if we were face to face, I would not be able to tell you the things that I did, but I'm desperate for help. And I'm very weak." Notice the reference to inferiority here. It is usually associated with that. I am a rotten person. I am very weak, and I'm tired of fighting and losing. I thought that getting married would help, but it didn't. You see, I'm a very low-down person. But I want to be up, I mean respectable, just to respect myself. I can't pay you. But if you would just take some time to try to give me some words of help in some way. Not even my religion has been able to help. I believe God can, I know that, but he hasn't yet, and maybe he will through you. Please, Dr. Dobson, write back to me, please, and tell me something. Yours truly, P.S. You are my last hope. Anything that matters that much to us, we ought to have the courage to talk about. Now, folks, let's talk about what you tell your kids and the moral implications of this situation. And that is the much harder aspect of the question. Let me first tell you what not to say. That's a whole lot easier. This, folks, is what you should not say to your pre-adolescent about masturbation. Are you ready? I found this in a book published about 1943, and it was my wife's book, and it was called How Christian Girls Grow Up. And this is the way the author dealt with the issue of masturbation. This is the traditional message to kids on that subject. Brace yourself now, doctors tell us that 95% of the boys practice at one time or another self-abuse, as she called it. And more than 65% of the girls engage in this habit. Many of you have been caught in its meshes and you want to be free. Now notice what she just drops in here. Ding. Whether or not the habit will cause you to go insane or is wrong is not the deciding factor in self-abuse. Folks, if that were true, there'd be a lot more crazy people walking around. Second thought, maybe that's what's wrong with us. Now listen to this now. She just said you're going to go crazy. This habit drains from your body vital fluids which nature demands to build a graceful and healthy body. And when you practice it, you are threatening your future. All right, it's going to cause you to go crazy, and you're going to die, too. You are also I don't know what's left after that, but you are also wrecking your sex nature so that sooner or later you will fail in giving the boy you marry the satisfaction his nature will demand, because before marriage you expended your vital reservoir of sex energy while young in a habit that should never be in a girl's life. Now her advice: when you feel that urge coming on you, get up immediately and do something different from what you're doing at the time. All right, that's pretty good advice. Throw your mind out of the sex gear and onto something which will demand your attention. If alone, get with someone else immediately. That could be risky, too. And do not give passion time to mature upon you. And her final comment, possibly, she just throws this in as a little afterthought, possibly you better change your eating habits and do less with hot peppers, condiments, and the like. That's not what to say to your kids. What do you say to them? Folks, I honestly don't know. And I used to deal with this subject and come to this point and say, in effect, I really don't think that it's right for me to tell you what I think because I don't know what God thinks. It is very dangerous to put words in the mouth of the Lord. And on the moral issues of this, the Bible is just about silent. There are obviously many places in the Bible where it talks about lusting. He that looketh on the body of a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her in his heart already. That relates, perhaps. We'll have to define what Jesus meant by lust. But there is no direct reference to it in the Bible. And so we have to be cautious in saying this is right or this is wrong. And I say again before the Lord right now, the last thing on earth that I want is to someday stand before God and be accused of misleading his people all over this country. Lord, I pray that that will not happen. And I still don't know the answer. All I can tell you is what I think. And I throw it out with great cautiousness because I don't feel I have a right to withhold that from you. You take it or leave it. Please do not go out of here and say, I said what God said, and that I'm speaking for God because I don't know. I can only tell you the conclusion that I have drawn. I see masturbation as an adolescent experience that is almost inevitable, and I don't believe that a loving God would put a raging fire in an immature kid and then damn him for doing what he can't help doing. That doesn't make sense to me. That does not represent sexual looseness or revisionism of the Scripture. Premarital sex is damned, and it should be. And the adultery and infidelity and all the rest of it, I believe it just straight as an arrow, but I just don't believe this developmental phase is condemned, and if it were, it would have been directly addressed. And what I attend, that's just my view. There's another way of looking at it. All I can tell you is the conclusion I've drawn. And my view on it is based on what my dad said to me when I was 11 years old. Because we were riding in the car. We had about 4 or 5 hours there of time to talk without interference. And the whole idea for this Preparing for Adolescence series, as nearly everything that I believe, came from him or from my mother. And he said a lot of things to me that night that I'll never forget. But one of the things that he said was, Jim, on the issue of masturbation, and he hit it head on, he said, I'm going to tell you something that I really can't tell you is right or not. I can only tell you the best conclusion I've been able to draw. And he was as straight as an arrow. I never saw him compromise one time in my life. He said when I was a boy, I went through agony over this issue. I could never enjoy my relationship with God. And he said it was all-encompassing. But he said, since I've become a man, I've prayed about it, and I've thought about it, and I've read the Bible, and I've talked to people that I believe in. And he said, what I'm going to tell you may not be right, but he said, I have drawn the conclusion that if it happens to you, I really wouldn't worry very much about it, because I don't think it has much to do with your relationship with God. And he lifted that off me. And in the adolescent years when my friends and my relatives and people that I knew were going through that agony, and some of them left the church and never came back at that time, I didn't struggle with that. And I will say that to my son, Ryan. I don't know if that's right. I know some of you come from a Catholic frame of reference. Please do understand that I do not mean to insult you. There are differences of opinion. And the last thing I want to do is to invite you here and then beat your theology down. I don't mean that. But I just feel that whatever you believe about it, if you disagree with me, you have an obligation to get your own message to your kids. That's what I'm saying. You see, don't allow them to go into those years without some message. And especially if you've told your kids, as I have, that there is a life after death, and that there is an accountability, and that someday our lives will be laid bare before God, and there is eternal punishment and eternal reward. I believe all that, and I've given that to my children. If you have too, then you really have a responsibility to help them deal with the guilt associated with this, because either way, they're going to do it. Okay. Now, thank you. This Preparing for Adolescence series, I've been recommending for a long time, and every time I recommended it, parents said the same thing. Tell me a little more about what to say. And folks, you'll notice that I do not recommend and tell you about my books and tapes and things. I'm not here to sell you anything. Really am not. I don't need that, and you don't need it either, and that's not what brought me here. However, if we do run short of books back there, there is a there's a semi-trailer truck parked out in there. But let me just say about Preparing for Adolescence that that album has been the best-selling album in the Christian community for some time now, it's my understanding, where I talk directly to the kids about these subjects. And there's not a lot of smoke and fires, just quiet conversations, and it led to a book by the same name. And I tell you that simply because I think it may help you get these messages across to your kids.
This concludes the second half of Preparing for Adolescence. On the next program, Dr. Dobson begins his two-part session on marriage entitled, What Wives Wish Their Husbands Knew About Women. See you then.